Emily stared down the imposing HOA board members, heart pounding. After years of fighting, she finally had the proof they'd been wrong all along. As the gavel slammed down, she knew her life was about to change forever. This was her one shot at justice, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Emily's grip tightened on the faded documents as she approached the front door of the HOA Community Center. For years, she'd weathered their endless threats and letters, but today was different. Today, she was going to bury them in their own rules. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside the lavish lobby. Crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead as Emily made her way to the front desk, ignoring the curious stares from the other residents. "I'm here to see the HOA board," she announced, voice quivering slightly. "They need to see these documents right away." The receptionist eyed her warily. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is important. It's about my shed." Emily could feel her palms beginning to sweat. "They said it was a violation, but I have proof it predates the neighborhood. Please, you have to let me in." After a tense moment, the receptionist sighed and picked up the phone. "I'll see if they can spare a few minutes." Emily's heart raced as she waited, mentally rehearsing what she would say. For years, she'd been battling the HOA over her small backyard shed, a quaint structure that had been there long before the first house was built. But the board members refused to listen, insisting it violated their strict covenants. Now, armed with old county records, she was determined to put an end to their harassment once and for all. The receptionist hung up the phone and gestured down the hall. "They'll see you now. Go straight to the second door on the left." Clutching the documents tightly, Emily hurried down the carpeted corridor, her footsteps echoing against the pristine walls. Rounding the corner, she found herself face to face with the imposing HOA board, all eyeing her with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Mrs. Granger, the HOA president, Mr. Fitzpatrick, spoke up, his tone dripping with disdain. "To what do we owe this unexpected visit?" Emily steeled her nerves, refusing to be intimidated. "I have something to show you all," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Something that proves my shed is not a violation, and that you've been hounding me for no reason." Fitzpatrick arched a bushy eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, by all means, present your case." Unfolding the documents, Emily laid them out on a mahogany table, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. "These are county records from before this community was even built. They show my shed was constructed in 1972, long before your precious covenants were put in place." The board members leaned forward, muttering under their breath as they scanned the evidence. Emily watched their expressions shift from skepticism to disbelief, and she knew in that moment she had them. "This can't be," Fitzpatrick breathed, his face paling. "That's impossible." "But it's true," Emily countered, a triumphant smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Your precious rules don't apply to me. The shed stays." The room erupted into a chorus of outraged voices, but Emily stood her ground, savoring the sweet taste of victory. After years of being pushed around, she had finally found a way to beat the HOA at their own game. And as the gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the meeting, she knew her life was about to change forever. The walk back to her car felt like an out-of-body experience. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the steering wheel, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. Triumph, disbelief, and a hint of trepidation all vied for dominance. She had done it. After years of fighting, she had finally proven the HOA wrong. Her precious shed, a relic from her family's past, was safe. No more threatening letters, no more looming fines. For once, she had emerged victorious against the tyrannical board. But as Emily pulled out of the parking lot, a nagging feeling of unease began to settle in the pit of her stomach. What would the HOA's reaction be? Surely they wouldn't take this lying down. These were the same people who had made her life a living hell for the past decade, after all. Arriving home, Emily hurried inside, locking the door behind her. She knew she needed to share the news with her husband, Dan, but a part of her hesitated. What if he didn't understand the gravity of the situation? What if he brushed it off as a mere technicality? Dan, honey, are you home? She called out, her voice trembling. Moments later, Dan appeared from the kitchen, a puzzled expression on his face. Hey, you're back early. Is everything okay? Emily took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. I just came from the HOA meeting. You're not going to believe what happened. Dan's brow furrowed. The HOA meeting? What did they say about the shed? That's just it, Emily said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. I proved them wrong. The shed predates the neighborhood. They can't do anything about it. Dan's eyes widened in surprise. Wait, really? You mean you won? Emily nodded, relief washing over her. Yes, I showed them the county records, and they had no choice but to back down. The shed is safe, Dan. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Dan let out a low whistle, pulling Emily into a tight embrace. That's amazing, honey. I knew you could do it. Those HOA bullies didn't stand a chance against you. Emily savored the warmth of his hug, allowing the tension in her body to melt away. For a moment, she felt like she could finally breathe easy. The long battle was over, and she had emerged victorious. But just as she was about to pull away, a sudden knock at the door sent a jolt of fear through her. Exchanging a worried glance with Dan, she slowly made her way to the entryway, her heart pounding in her chest. Peering through the peephole, Emily's breath caught in her throat. There, standing on her doorstep, were the members of the HOA board, their expressions grave and unyielding. This was far from over. Emily's hands trembled as she unlocked the door, her mind racing with a million possible scenarios. What could the HOA board possibly want now? Hadn't she done enough to prove her case? Steeling her nerves, she pulled the door open, coming face to face with the imposing figures of the HOA president, Mr. Fitzpatrick, and several other board members. Mrs. Granger, Fitzpatrick began, his voice laced with a forced calm. We need to have a word with you. Emily swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. What is it? I thought we resolved this issue already. Fitzpatrick's eyes narrowed, and Emily could sense the barely contained anger simmering beneath the surface. That's precisely the problem, Mrs. Granger. You haven't resolved anything. In fact, you've made a mockery of this community and its rules. Emily felt her hackles rise at his condescending tone. I don't understand. I provided you with irrefutable proof that my shed predates this neighborhood. What more do you want? What we want, Fitzpatrick spat, is for you to remove that eyesore from your backyard immediately. Your little stunt may have worked today, but this is far from over. Emily's jaw dropped in disbelief. You can't be serious. I've played by your rules for years, and now that I've finally proven my innocence, you're still trying to punish me. Fitzpatrick's lips curled into a sneer. You think you've won, don't you, Mrs. Granger? Well, let me assure you, this is only the beginning. We have ways of dealing with residents who refuse to comply with our covenants. A chill ran down Emily's spine at the implied threat, and she instinctively stepped back, shielding the door with her body. You can't do this. I have the documents to prove. The documents, Fitzpatrick interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain, are irrelevant. This is our community, and we make the rules. You'd do well to remember that. Emily's heart raced as she watched the board members turn and walk away, their footsteps echoing against the pavement. She knew in that moment that the battle was far from over, and that the HOA was determined to use every trick in the book to bring her down. Closing the door, she leaned back against it, her legs feeling like jelly. Dan, who had been watching the exchange from the living room, hurried to her side, his eyes filled with concern. Emily? What happened? What did they want? Emily's voice trembled as she recounted the encounter, the fear and anger coursing through her veins. They're not going to stop, Dan. They're going to keep coming after me, no matter what I do. Dan pulled her into a comforting embrace, his brow furrowed with worry. Don't worry, honey. We'll figure this out. We're not going to let them bully you anymore. Emily clung to him, taking strength from his unwavering support. But as she gazed out the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that the war with the HOA was far from over. They had drawn a line in the sand, and she knew she had no choice but to fight back. This wasn't just about a shed anymore. It was about standing up for her rights, her home, and her very way of life. And she was determined to win, no matter the cost. The tension in the Granger household was palpable as Emily and Dan huddled together, trying to make sense of the HOA's latest demands. They can't just ignore the evidence I presented, Emily said, her voice laced with frustration. Those records clearly show the shed was built long before this community existed. Dan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, honey, but you know how these HOA boards operate. They play by their own rules, and they're not going to back down easily. Emily felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. Well, neither am I. I'm not going to let them bully me into submission. Not after everything I've been through. Reaching for her laptop, Emily began furiously typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm going to dig deeper, see if there's anything else I can use to fight them. There has to be a way to make them see reason. Dan watched her with a mix of admiration and concern. Just be careful, okay? I don't want you to get yourself into any more trouble with these people. Trouble? Emily scoffed, her eyes narrowing. They're the ones causing trouble. And I'm not going to sit back and let them walk all over me. Not this time. As the evening wore on, Emily's determination only grew stronger. She pored over old documents, court records, and community bylaws, searching for any loophole or leverage she could use against the HOA. Finally, just as the clock struck midnight, a triumphant smile spread across her face. I've got it, she declared, her eyes alight with excitement. Dan, who had been dozing on the couch, jolted awake. What is it? Did you find something? Yes, Emily exclaimed, her voice brimming with confidence. It turns out the HOA's own bylaws prohibit them from taking any action against a structure that predates the community. And since I have the paperwork to prove my shed is older than the neighborhood, they have no legal grounds to demand its removal. Dan's eyes widened with realization. So, you're saying? I'm saying, Emily interrupted, that they're the ones who are in violation of their own rules. And if they try to push this any further, I'm going to take them to court. The gleam in her eyes left no doubt that she was dead serious. After years of being pushed around, Emily Granger was finally ready to fight back. And this time, she was determined to win. As the first hints of dawn began to creep through the windows, Emily and Dan huddled together, mapping out their next move. They knew the battle ahead would be tough, but with the law on their side, they were more than ready to take on the HOA. For Emily, this was more than just a fight over a shed. It was a stand against the tyranny of her own community, a chance to reclaim her rights and her dignity. And she wasn't about to let anyone stand in her way. The next morning, Emily marched into the HOA office, her head held high and a stack of documents clutched in her hand. She knew this confrontation could make or break her fight, but she was determined to stand her ground. As she approached the receptionist's desk, the woman eyed her warily. Mrs. Granger, what can I do for you today? I need to speak with the board, Emily replied, her voice steady and resolute. It's regarding the issue with my shed. The receptionist hesitated, clearly taken aback by Emily's confident demeanor. I'm afraid the board is in a meeting at the moment. Perhaps you could come back later. Emily shook her head. This can't wait. It's a matter of urgency, and I won't leave until I've had my say. The receptionist's eyes widened, and she quickly picked up the phone, murmuring a few hurried words. Moments later, the door to the boardroom swung open, and Mr. Fitzpatrick emerged, his expression a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Mrs. Granger, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. To what do we owe this unexpected visit? Emily took a deep breath, then held out the stack of documents. I have something to show you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Something that proves once and for all that my shed is not a violation of your precious covenants. Fitzpatrick's brow furrowed as he took the documents, quickly scanning through the pages. Emily watched as his expression shifted from skepticism to outright disbelief. This can't be, he muttered, his eyes darting back and forth. Oh, but it is, Emily replied, a triumphant smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Your own bylaws state that any structure predating the community is exempt from your rules. And since my shed was built in 1972, long before this neighborhood was even a twinkle in your eye, you have no legal grounds to demand its removal. Fitzpatrick's face reddened as he slammed the documents down on the desk. This is outrageous. You can't expect us to simply ignore our own covenants just because of some technicality. Emily's eyes narrowed. Technicality? This is the law, Mr. Fitzpatrick. And if you choose to ignore it, I'll have no choice but to take you to court. The room erupted into a chorus of angry murmurs, but Emily refused to be intimidated. She had done her homework, and she knew the law was on her side. You can't do this to us, Fitzpatrick seethed, his fists clenched in frustration. This community was built on upholding our standards. We can't just let you walk all over them. Then don't, Emily retorted, her voice dripping with defiance. But if you try to push this any further, you'll be the ones breaking the rules. And I can assure you, the courts won't look kindly on that. The tension in the room was palpable as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Emily could see the wheels turning in their minds, and she knew she had them on the ropes. We'll need time to review this, Fitzpatrick finally said, his tone laced with reluctance. But you can rest assured we will not back down easily, Mrs. Granger. Emily's lips curled into a wry smile. We'll see about that, Mr. Fitzpatrick. We'll see about that. As she turned and strode out of the office, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had taken the fight to the HOA, and for once she had the upper hand. Now, it was just a matter of waiting to see if they had the courage to challenge her. The days that followed were filled with a tense, uneasy silence. Emily waited with bated breath, knowing that the HOA board was undoubtedly strategizing their next move. She could feel their eyes on her every time she stepped outside, the weight of their scrutiny bearing down on her like a physical presence. Dan, ever the voice of reason, tried to temper her anxiety. They're probably just trying to figure out how to handle this without making fools of themselves, he would say, offering a reassuring squeeze of her hand. But Emily couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that the HOA had something up their sleeve. These were not the kind of people who simply admitted defeat, no matter how strong the evidence against them. They're plotting something, Dan, she would insist, pacing nervously around their living room. I can feel it. They're not going to let this go without a fight. Dan would sigh, understanding the depth of her conviction. Then we'll be ready for them, honey. We've got the law on our side, remember. Emily would nod, her resolve renewed, but the tension in her shoulders never fully dissipated. She knew the battle was far from over, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down, even for a moment. Then, one afternoon, as Emily was tending to her garden, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of her house. Her heart leaped into her throat as she recognized the familiar figures of the HOA board members, led by Fitzpatrick himself. Steeling her nerves, she approached them, her chin held high. What is the meaning of this, Mr. Fitzpatrick? Fitzpatrick's lips curled into a cold, calculated smile. Mrs. Granger, we've been doing some additional research into the history of your property, and we've made a rather interesting discovery. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show her fear. And what would that be? It would appear, Fitzpatrick continued, his tone dripping with triumph, that the land your shed is built on was, in fact, part of the original community plan. Which means, my dear, that it is subject to our covenants after all. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. That's impossible. I have the county records to prove. The county records are irrelevant. Fitzpatrick interrupted, his voice raised. This is our community, and we make the rules. Your shed is in violation, and it must be removed. Immediately. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat as she watched the other board members move forward, brandishing clipboards and official-looking documents. We've already drawn up the paperwork, Fitzpatrick said, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of satisfaction. All you need to do is sign, and we can get this unsightly structure taken care of. Emily felt her world crumbling around her. How could this be happening? She had been so sure, so confident in her victory. And now, it seemed, the HOA had found a way to outmaneuver her. As the board members closed in, Emily's mind raced, desperately searching for a way to fight back. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that they had her cornered. Without any further evidence to counter their claims, she had no choice but to capitulate. With a trembling hand, she reached for the clipboard, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a moment of utter defeat, a bitter taste of the consequences of challenging the HOA's power. As the board members turned to leave, Fitzpatrick paused, his gaze locking with Emily's. You should have known better than to cross us, Mrs. Granger. This is our community, and we always get the last word. Emily watched, her heart shattering, as the SUV pulled away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. She had lost, and she knew it. The HOA had won. The sound of the bulldozer rumbling to life pierced the air like a death knell, filling Emily with a sense of dread and hopelessness. She stood on her porch, watching helplessly as the massive machine lumbered towards her beloved shed, its metal jaws poised to devour the structure she had fought so hard to protect. Dan stood beside her, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders, but even his comforting presence couldn't dull the ache in her heart. They had been so close, so sure that they had finally won, only to have the rug pulled out from under them at the last moment. I don't understand, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. How could they do this? After all the evidence I presented, how could they still find a way to take it down? Dan sighed, his grip tightening ever so slightly. I wish I knew, honey. But you were right. They weren't going to back down without a fight. And unfortunately, they seem to have found a way to turn this in their favor. Emily watched as the bulldozer operator climbed into the cab, his face set in a grim, determined expression. With a deafening roar, the machine lurched forward, its massive steel blade cutting into the shed's weathered wood. A strangled cry escaped Emily's lips as she watched the structure crumble, years of memories and sentiment reduced to splinters and rubble. She had poured her heart and soul into that shed, and now it was gone, torn away by the unforgiving march of the HOA's agenda. This isn't fair, she whispered, her voice wavering with anguish. I did everything right. I played by their rules, I proved my case, and they still found a way to take it from me. Dan pulled her close, his own eyes glistening with tears. I know, honey. I know. But we can't give up, not yet. There has to be something we can do. Emily shook her head, her bitterness and despair threatening to consume her. What's the point, Dan? They've made it clear that they don't care about the law or about what's right. They just want to win, no matter the cost. The sound of the bulldozer's engines grew deafening as it continued its relentless assault on the shed, reducing it to a pile of splintered debris. Emily watched, her heart shattering with every passing moment, as her link to the past was torn away. I'm sorry, honey, Dan murmured, his voice barely audible over the din. I'm so sorry. Emily leaned into him, tears streaming down her cheeks. In that moment, she felt utterly defeated, her spirit crushed by the unyielding force of the HOA's power. She had fought with everything she had, and still, they had found a way to take it all away. As the last remnants of the shed were swallowed by the jaws of the bulldozer, Emily's resolve hardened. She couldn't, let them win. Not like this. This had gone beyond a simple dispute over a shed. It was a fight for her home, her community, and her very way of life. Straightening her shoulders, she turned to Dan, her eyes burning with a new determination. This isn't over, Dan. I'm not giving up. Not yet. I'm going to take this all the way, no matter what it takes. Dan searched her face, a glimmer of hope flickering in his own expression. What are you going to do? Emily's lips curled into a grim smile. Whatever it takes to make them regret the day they crossed me. The battle lines had been drawn, and Emily Granger was prepared to wage war. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity as Emily and Dan worked tirelessly to mount their final offensive against the HOA. With the shed gone and their backs against the wall, they knew they had to pull out all the stops if they were going to have any chance of emerging victorious. Emily spent countless hours poring over legal documents, searching for any loophole or technicality that could give them an edge. She made call after call to local lawyers, pleading for their help and guidance, determined to find a way to make the HOA pay for their underhanded tactics. Meanwhile, Dan took to the streets, rallying the other residents of the community to their cause. He knocked on doors, organized town hall meetings, and used every means at his disposal to spread the word about the HOA's corruption and abuse of power. This isn't just about Emily's shed, he would tell the gathered crowds, his voice filled with a righteous fury. It's about the rights of every single person in this community. We can't let them get away with this. The groundswell of support that began to build was both heartening and terrifying. Emily could see the fear and unease in the eyes of the HOA board members as they watched their iron grip on the community start to slip. They had never anticipated such a fierce and unified pushback against their authority. And that, Emily knew, was their fatal mistake. Finally, after weeks of ceaseless effort, Emily and Dan made their move. Armed with a mountain of evidence and the backing of a growing number of residents, they filed a comprehensive lawsuit against the HOA, alleging everything from breach of contract to civil rights violations. The court proceedings were tense and explosive, with both sides battling tooth and nail for the upper hand. Emily and Dan presented their case with unwavering conviction, refuting every argument the HOA's lawyers threw at them. And in the end, their perseverance paid off. The judge, clearly swayed by the overwhelming evidence of the HOA's misconduct, delivered a scathing ruling in their favor. Not only were the board members ordered to pay hefty fines and damages, but they were also stripped of their authority, effectively dismantling the corrupt organization. As the news spread through the community, a collective sigh of relief and celebration erupted. Neighbors who had once been at odds with one another were now united in their joy and gratitude towards Emily and Dan, the unlikely heroes who had stood up to the HOA's tyranny. For Emily, the victory was bittersweet. While she was overjoyed to have reclaimed her rights and her dignity, the loss of her beloved shed still weighed heavily on her heart. But as she looked out at the faces of her newfound allies, she knew that the fight had been worth it. "This is just the beginning," she told Dan, her eyes shining with determination. "We're going to use this momentum to transform this community, to make it the kind of place where people can live without fear of being bullied by their own neighbors." Dan pulled her into a warm embrace, his own eyes filled with pride and admiration. "I have no doubt you'll do it, honey. You've already proven that you're not going to back down, no matter what they throw at you." As the sun set over the community, Emily and Dan stood together, their shoulders squared and their heads held high. They had won the battle, but the war for the soul of their neighborhood was far from over, and they were more than ready to take it on, one fight at a time.